Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting edition of Chromatographic, the show in which I, Matt the Game Boyle, take you through the highs and lows of the Game Boy Color library. This week we're looking at a timely seasonal episode. It's Baby Felix Halloween. As most Game Boy collectors know, the Game Boy Color library, perhaps even more so than that of the original console, is filled with licensed titles. Some are great, some are broken, but considering the average development time of these games was around the 3-month mark, it's not entirely surprising that some games turn out better than others. By late 2001, however, with the launch of Nintendo's Game Boy Advance system earlier in the year, offering games like Mario Kart Super Circuit and Advanced Wars, studios were beginning to turn their attention to making games for the newer platform. That's not to say the Game Boy Color wouldn't get a slew of great titles in 2002. After all, Shantae, Rhino Rumble and Resident Evil Gaiden were all launched that year. It's just that for smaller studios like Spanish handheld legends Bit Managers, the writing was on the wall. The late 90s had been an interesting time for the Spanish studio. Having recently purchased themselves back from their parent company Galico, Bit Managers were once again more independent and looking for work. It was during this time that the company struck up some contracts to work on games for the French company Light and Shadow Productions, and yes, one of these games was Baby Felix Halloween. Baby Felix and Friends, for those not familiar with the license, is a bit like a snake eating its own tail. The original Felix the Cat was, like many other Western characters like the Moomins and Peanuts, very popular in Japan. Thus, in the year 2000, Don Oriolo, son of Felix's creator Joe Oriolo, decided to make an anime based on Felix to capitalise on the success of the license there. Thus, Baby Felix, a much more kawaii version of the character, was created in a similar vein to other baby cartoon revivals, like Tom and Jerry Kids and the Muppet Babies. The anime aired in Japan for 65 episodes from 2000 to 2001. The quality of the animation and storytelling is a little bit dubious on the show, but fortunately we don't need to concern ourselves too much with that here. All you really need to know about the show is that it introduced a whole host of extra characters to the Felix universe, and naturally also made a baby version of Felix's love interest, Kitty the Cat, to boot. The show would eventually make its way to the US and Europe, with only 26 of those 65 episodes getting a full English dub. LSP got a hold of the license and commissioned 2 games based on the property, Baby Felix Tennis for the PS1, and of course, Baby Felix Halloween for the Game Boy Color. The game sees you play as either Baby Felix or Baby Kitty, selectable at the start screen, who, on their way to a Halloween party, discover a haunted house. It turns out that their friends have been lured into the house themselves and captured. Naturally, it's up to our heroes to save their friends and get to the party. The word Halloween in the game's title is a little misleading, however, as other than the hub, only the first of the game's 5 worlds is Halloween themed at all. You've got Prehistoric World, Outer Space, Pirate Island, and Western World. While some of these worlds take inspiration from the TV show, it's very clear that a lot of them were just the designers having fun. The bulk of the gameplay revolves around you platforming your chosen kitten through the world, defeating enemies by hitting B or hitting select to shoot them with a regular or charged shot. The platforming itself is very reminiscent of Bit's earlier work on Spyro, where you need to jump and hang Prince of Persia style from platforms in order to scale them. Something I really didn't find that intuitive at first, but I promise you'll get used to it if you stick with it. The game does try to add a little bit of variety into the platforming experience, with various auto-scrolling levels dotted around the worlds to keep players on their toes. You'll find yourself climbing to escape rising lava, for example, surfing on a comet, or running as fast as you can from that ever-deadly invisible threat to the left of the screen. The only real difference between the kittens themselves is aesthetic. Felix hits enemies with his hat and has a slingshot for ranged attacks, while Kitty uses her wand for both melee hits and to fire off spells. There's no noticeable difference in their speed, strength or jump height, so just let your heart decide who you want to be. At the end of each world is naturally a boss fight, loosely themed to the world, and I have to say, I found these to be quite fun. Sure, they're all just hitting them as much as you can until they die, but there's some variety in the fights here, and even on the easiest difficulty, you might find yourself having a little bit of trouble with them. Yes, much like the game allows you to select between the main European languages, the game also allows you to select your difficulty from the options menu depending on how you like it. Easy, medium or hard, naturally. The biggest difference between these modes is the amount of hits to kill an enemy, the damage they deal, and on hard, naturally, there's no continues. Pretty standard stuff. I honestly think you're not going to have too much trouble on the game whatever difficulty you play it on, however, but don't be tricked by how easy Halloween World is. The game has some incredibly finicky parts and cheaper enemies later on that will balance the game out a little. No, this really does feel like a classic case of a game finding its stride at the end of a playthrough, which is a bit of a shame. Visually, the game does have some very nice animation and great sprites to boot. However, some of the colour palettes, as Game Boy Color games are wont to do, really do look a little bit jarring. Especially Prehistoric World for me, they really dialed up that green and it makes the whole thing feel very slapdash in contrast to the rest of the title. The real draw here for me though is the soundtrack. Baby Felix Halloween is Game Boy composing legend Alberto González's last soundtrack for the Game Boy, and oh boy is it a good one. If you like that kind of charging, rhythmic, trance-inspired music that González is known for, then man, are you in for a treat. While the Western theme is a particular favourite of mine, there's not a bad track to be found here. I asked the man himself if he had any fond memories of working on the soundtrack, and he admits that while he was a bit tired of working on the Game Boy at that point, after 11 years, he enjoyed composing this particular game and its sound effects. The pirate theme, he said, was something he'd created years before when composing for 8-bit computers, but didn't quite fit anywhere until Baby Felix. He also mentioned that the ELO song Twilight was an inspiration for the Outer Space theme, and listening to them both side by side, you can certainly hear a bit of that in the chorus. But as I mentioned right up top, this was Bitmanager's last Game Boy Color outing. The studio had begun to develop Asterix and Obelix Path of All for the Game Boy Advance alongside Baby Felix, and both shipped within a month of each other. Felix in December 2001, and Asterix in January 2002. See, and you thought I was late with this video's release. I'm just going for the game's 17th anniversary. While perhaps not their strongest title to go out on, Bits managed to make Baby Felix Halloween a far better game than the license deserves. But I have to be honest, it's not something I recommend you rush out and buy for anything other than its score. While the game is a relatively straightforward experience, it can get cheap in places. Its downfall is that despite having a lot of good ideas, the IP itself feels a little pasted on top, and as a result, loses some of the charm that might have given it a little bit more longevity in your Game Boy Color once you're done with it. Instead, the game is a rather one-and-done affair. There's a password system to allow for pick-up-and-play gaming, but I honestly feel you can beat this game in one sitting, making the feature a little redundant if not welcomed. If you see it cheap, be sure to pick up this European exclusive. There's truly much worse out there you could play, but then again, there's also a lot better. And that brings us to the end of another Chromatographic, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, let me know in the comments down below, and a special thank you to Alberto J. González for helping me out with this one. Until next week, Game Boys and Girls, where I'll be back with another hit. Game on.